If you take a moment just to greet one another, quite frankly, because I just need a moment to arrange something. So just greet one another in the name of the Lord. 30 seconds, ready, go. All right, if you can find your way back to a seat, thank you for doing that. If you could find your way back to a seat. I was talking to a woman who was pregnant and just about the risks of pregnancy, that all kinds of things can show up. There can be all kinds of problems when you're pregnant. And we talked about all the risks. But then she said this. She said, actually, the womb is the safest place for my child. And I thought about that, and I thought, that's right. You are never more safe than you are before you come out, while you're in the womb. Because once you're out, everything gets successively more risky. That's why we have baby locks on everything, and car seats, and cribs, and a million safety features on all the baby stuff. Because with each successive day and year, life gets more and more risky for a human being. So you think about once you're born, all this stuff, you can get sick, and ear infections, and falls, and then there's kindergarten, and you drop them off, and you walk away as a parent, and you're like, well, you have to figure it out. And then there's middle school, or high school, or college, or the military, or the workforce. And with each successive year, life gets more and more risky. And if you're a mom or a parent, you know that. You have less and less control with each day once they come out into the world. But this is the way that it's supposed to be. As a mother or a parent, you don't want it any other way. You don't want your kids to go backwards. Sometimes when my kids were younger and they'd cling to my wife, she'd say, didn't we cut the umbilical cord? And you don't want them to be so tight that they're lashed to you. You don't want to be that parent that just sort of wraps your kids in bubble wrap to keep them from ever getting injured or hurt. Your kids are meant to be out in the world. They're meant to live. They're meant for things that they're supposed to do, and with those things comes risk. And as parents, you know that. There's inherent risk just in life and in living. I see a trend among Christians today, and quite frankly, a little bit even in myself, a trend to retreat instead of risk. Maybe even to be a little bit afraid of risk, to run back to the safety of the womb and avoid anything that might hurt. When God calls you, He calls you to do important things that inherently have risk. And so I hear, even in myself, a voice that says, the world is so wicked, it's so bad out there. We can't afford to go out there. We can't send our kids out there. We got to remove ourselves. We have to retreat and get away or escape this evil world. There's a little voice maybe in you too, but I see it in Christians that see the world is so bad, we just have to avoid it and retreat. And so we retreat back into sort of Christian ghettos and holy huddles to try to avoid anything that might threaten us. Build up little walls so that we can be comfortable and safe. And we think, well, then no one will taint our doctrine, and no one will corrupt our children then. and nothing will hurt us if we just sort of create this Christian enclave. That's a temptation, maybe a little bit, for all of us to avoid. Instead of risking retreat. So we come to our readings today in Scripture, and I can't help but notice that there is some inherent risk in the readings for today. Anything but retreat, it's risky. I'm having trouble with my clicker today, so Suzanne, do you mind right off the bat in our gospel reading, Jesus is praying to the Father. There's a sense of risk in this. I want to clarify. I would call it righteous risk. I'm not talking about foolish risk, like you're going to take $1,000 to the casino right now. That's not what I'm talking about. I would call it righteous risk, a godly risk, not for selfish gain, but a righteous risk is when God calls you to do something great, and it takes faith to do it. And when God calls you to do something, often it requires faith, and often that faith requires an element or a degree of risk by its very nature. That's what I mean by righteous risk. It's a godly risk, not foolish. And so Jesus, in his prayer to the Father, John 17:15, there's a sense of risk in this. If you'd read it with me. I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but that you keep them from the evil one. So Jesus prayed for you. He said, Father, don't take them out of the world. He's not praying for your escape, for your retreat. Father, I pray that you don't take them out of it. We've talked about this, I think, even just a couple of weeks ago. That word world does not mean the world in all of its beauty and grandeur. That's not what that word world means. It's cosmos is the word, and it means the world in all of its wicked rebellion against the Maker. It means the world at its worst, not its best. And so Jesus prayed for you, and he prayed, Father, I ask that you don't take them out of this world, even with all of its terror and violence and wickedness and sin. Don't take them out. He says, don't take them out, but preserve them in it. Don't remove them or cause them to retreat, but let them stand out in the middle of it, that they look different. And so there's a risk that you take, that we all take, to be in the world, kept from the evil one, and stand as witnesses in this world. That's risky, and Jesus prayed for it for you. We also get a sense in the Acts reading. We get a sense of risk. This is Acts 1:15. If you'd read this with me. In those days, Peter stood up among the brothers. The company of persons was in all about 120. In a world of, at that time, probably millions of people, there were only 120 followers of Jesus. Isn't that crazy? On that day, that particular day, 120 followers of Jesus. Before it was a worldwide movement, before there was a billion, there was 120. They were fearful, they were scared, a little huddled minority. That's why Jesus on Easter found them behind locked doors, because they were scared, and there were only 120. It's a risky thing to be a small minority of Jesus followers in a world that is hostile to you or indifferent to you. It's a risky thing to be one of the 120. Well, they were looking for a replacement for Judas, one of the 12. Pastor Paul and I were talking one of the weirdest scriptures when Judas and his guts burst open and all of that. If you want gore, just go back to Acts chapter 1. But they're looking for a replacement now for Judas, who will stand as one of the 12 to complete that 12, that initial founding 12. And so they have to have a process for this. They need one to replace him. Acts 1:22, if you'd read this with me. One of these men must become with us a witness to his resurrection. So to replace Jesus or Judas, what are the criteria to be one of these apostles? Well, one of the criteria was that they had to be a witness, an eyewitness of the resurrection. They had to have seen Jesus, seen him die, and then seen him alive again. that was one of the criteria on the resume to be one of those apostles. And so, they had to be an eyewitness to his resurrection. That's risky. Even today, a lot of people are reluctant to be an eyewitness and go to the police because you're afraid if I do, I risk my reputation, or maybe I risk harm or retribution. So a lot of people are reluctant to be an eyewitness. So imagine these: to be an eyewitness, to be one of the few that would stand up publicly and say, I saw it, I believe it publicly, the man from Nazareth who died and rose again. There was great risk. So to replace Judas, they came down to 2 names, but they only needed one, and so they prayed. By the way, prayer is a risky thing. Be careful when you pray, because God just might answer it. It's risky. So they prayed, and then this happened. Acts 1:26, if you'd read with me. And they cast lots for them, and the lot fell on Matthias, and he was numbered with the 11 apostles. This is interesting. They rolled the dice. I don't think that Scripture's advocating gambling, but there's like a holy gamble right here. Isn't that interesting? Now, I think it's different than gambling that you might be familiar with. So sports betting is huge today, like DraftKings or whatever. It's huge. But in that instance, you're putting your money and your trust in a company that you shouldn't trust, by the way, because they win every time. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in business. They couldn't afford the commercials on TV. So it's not putting your trust in a company, but here they put their trust in the living God. And it's a holy gamble, and the lot falls to Matthias. It's risky, and they're willing to take a risk by faith, to trust. It'd be easier to stay in the comfortable cove. That would be easier. But Christ calls us to faith, and faith requires a righteous risk. It's a risk when you're in high school to not go along with what everyone else is doing. It's a risk to choose a career based on impact and not income. To take less money to do a job that has more meaning. That's a risk. It's a risk to tithe your income to God and not to sock it away. Some of you do that. That's risky. It's a risk to take in a foster child or an adopted child into your home. It's a risk to make a decision by prayer and not by personal preference. To say, God, thy will be done, not mine. That's risky. It's a risk to love someone unconditionally or to help someone that you know will never be able to pay you back. It is a risk to forgive someone who's wronged you. It's a risk to send your child and not just shelter your child. You're faced with choices every day, choices you make by faith, and faith that requires a righteous risk. It's part of being a follower of Jesus of Nazareth. Last weekend, I went to Concordia University in Nebraska for a couple of graduations. We have 2 students of our church who graduated from Concordia and are going into church work. And so, went to be with them. Michaela Adams is an overachiever. She is kind of double majored in Lutheran school teacher and director of Christian education. And so, in the fall, she's going to do her student teaching, and then right after that, she's going to do a year-long DCE internship, and then somewhere in the middle of that, decide which one she wants to do. She doesn't know exactly which one she wants to do, but she does know that God has called her to serve kids and families and the church in Jesus' name. and she probably won't come back home. She's going to be deployed somewhere, maybe anywhere in the country. She just doesn't know. That requires faith, which requires a little bit of righteous risk, godly risk. The other graduate was Charles. Charles grew up in a refugee camp in Uganda and came to the United States, was fortunate enough to come with his mom and his brothers to the United States. And it was a risk to learn a new language, to learn a new culture. Charles became a United States citizen, and then here just last week became the first person in his entire family to earn a bachelor's degree. And now he's returned to St. Louis, and he's going to really be a tent maker, kind of like St. Paul. He's going to get a job that's going to provide for his family in IT, and then he's going to continue a ministry that he helped start, our African youth ministry on Sunday nights. We're going to call him, our church will call him this summer to be a missionary, particularly to youth in that category. And that's risky. It takes a righteous risk. It is a risk to send our children out, to raise up our young people and to deploy them. That's risky. But you don't have to be Michaela or Charles. You don't have to be in professional church work to have a righteous risk. Every one of you has a unique calling from God. Everyone in this room right now, whether you know it or not, God has a unique call on your life. And that may change and shift over the years of your life and different stages of life. But I know I can say this with certainty. Every one of you has a unique call from the living God. Things that He is calling you to do. And by nature, those things will require faith of you, because they will probably be challenging, maybe difficult. You may not be able to see visible results in front of you, so it requires faith. We walk by faith and not by sight. And if that's the case, then it's going to require some righteous risk. So every one of you in this room is called to some degree of righteous risk. And you might ask, well, how do I do that? When Christ calls you and it pushes you outside of your comfort zone, you might ask, how do I do that? What if I don't want to? And if I don't want to, then how do I do it? Let me tell you, Jesus prayed for you. That's how you do it. Jesus prayed for you. Take a look, one more last verse from our gospel reading, John chapter 17. If you'd read with me. As you sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world. Jesus prayed for you, and He prayed to the Father this prayer. Father, as you sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world. That is a risky prayer. It's risky for you because it means that you're deployed out and you're not quite sure where or how or what's going to happen. But I want you to note a really important detail in this particular sentence. Note that before He sends you into the world, He was sent first. Jesus always goes first. The order is really important here. Jesus doesn't ask you to do anything that He has not already done Himself. He's already gone before you. As you have sent me, Father, into the world, so I have sent them. Jesus goes before you. He goes first. He's the Lord of righteous risk. It was risky to be sent to be a human on this planet. It was risky. Think about this. Jesus was born probably into the most dangerous part of the world that 2,000 years later still remains probably one of the most dangerous parts of the whole world, filled with war and turmoil. That is the world into which Jesus was born. That is risky. He's the Lord of righteous risk. It was a risk. to do ministry among messy people. It was a risk to journey to Jerusalem. It was a risk, the risk of arrest and trial and torture, the risk of nails and wood and blood. But he risked it all, everything for you. Don't ever forget that. Don't ever just think that, oh, Jesus died for my sins, and it's just a Sunday school answer. Don't ever forget how risky it was, that he risked everything, and it was for you, for your salvation, for your life. And without it, you would be nothing. He is the Lord of righteous risk. And when Christ calls you to do something great, you can't return to the womb. Sorry, can't go backwards. And you can't retreat. No turning back. By faith, we take a righteous risk. And we do it because Jesus goes first. Amen.